Hi, my name is Anna Cross, and I'm a life science teacher in Northeast Los Angeles. Today, I'm going to talk to you about why you should teach environmental justice. I think one of the biggest questions that we might ask ourselves as educators when we're asked to think outside the box is why. So, why teach environmental justice? And the primary answer that I have for you is to empower your students with information. To start with, going into what environmental justice is. So to introduce the topic to my students, I will always start with definitions so that they know what we're talking about, and then we can apply that to examples within the class. And so to also ground this conversation in what environmental justice is, it is the fair treatment of all people, of all races, cultures, incomes, and education levels with respect to the development and enforcement of environmental laws, regulation, and policy. And then when I teach this, I also like to give my students the additional vocabulary terms: justice, which is fair behavior or treatment, and injustice, which is the lack of fairness or justice. And so through environmental justice efforts, we're trying to point out or fix injustices, especially looking at injustices that are disproportionately affecting communities of color. And if you're teaching in Northeast Los Angeles, then you are probably teaching within a community of color. So being aware of this is essential information for not just you as an educator, but also you as a student. To kind of add an additional layer to this, when I teach environmental justice, I also teach what environmental racism is. So being very explicit in the terms and definitions that we're using so that students understand how to apply those when we're looking at scientific data. So understanding that environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. So the environmental justice movement, environmental justice is essentially the movement's response to environmental racism. Through environmental justice, we seek to rectify inequalities that are produced because of environmental racism. And to help my ninth grade students understand this, so I teach 11th grade environmental science, and I also teach ninth grade biology. Within ninth grade biology, there are two places that this could fit, either at the very beginning or at the very end of the year. This year, we're doing this at the end of the year as kind of a final project. And to help my ninth grade students really dig in and understand this topic, I'm actually teaming up with the ninth grade ELA teacher. This also kind of brings in the idea of how cross-curricular projects can really empower our students. So being able to see this in multiple subjects throughout virtual learning is helping students to also see the importance of this, right? If I'm seeing this in my English and my biology class, I'm a lot more likely to pay attention to this issue. So I would highly recommend coupling with someone at your school site to teach this subject with, because having your students seeing this in multiple places is really going to help them understand the relevancy of it. And additionally, it provides an extra layer of support. We were able to go much more in depth with these topics because I was really focusing on the science and the data, whereas my colleague was really focusing on dissecting reading with students, annotating reading, and then finding the key point and information from text. So again, collaboration is also key to helping our students out and really driving equity within our schools, I think can be fostered through collaboration as well. But back to environmental justice. So we also wanted to empower our students. So we didn't just focus on environmental justice, we also focused on youth activism. So what are the youth doing? How are the youth changing the world? And also what is currently being done so that we're not just kind of giving our students this information about how they're being affected by this and how this is happening across our country and across the globe, but empowering students with information that there are movements happening to try to rectify this issue. And so I also highly recommend using guiding questions as a way to kind of center your lessons. And so some of the essential questions that we had for the unit was, what is environmental justice? How is pollution related to inequality? And how can we use maps and graphs to help us see where injustice exists? Because I teach science, we are looking at scientific data and we're looking for a scientific basis for the idea of environmental justice and environmental racism. So we really focused on gathering data and then making conclusions by looking at that data. So one of the examples that we looked at to get started was air pollution. This was an example in the state of Connecticut. What I highly recommend is creating a lesson, either if you're doing it a standalone lesson, really focusing on your community, or if you're doing multiple lessons, ensuring that one of your lessons is focused on your population. And so for this, we look directly at environmental racism in LA County. And to help us understand instances of environmental racism, we looked at maps. So the map on the left is showing the pollution burden in LA County, and the map on the right is showing the distribution of people that do not identify as white. So the areas that you see that are red and orange have the highest percentage of Los Angelinos that do not identify as white. As you can see, that directly correlates on this example to the areas with the highest pollution burden. So my students were able to see this very clear correlation between where people of color live in LA and where there's the most pollution versus where Los Angelinos that identify as white live and how their pollution compared. So again, if you're able to, and I know it does require that extra step of creating the lesson on your own and finding the material and data, but my students being able to connect this with their community really made the difference and drove home this clear data and examples of environmental justice and environmental racism. And so to just bring us back, I really do encourage you all to jump in and take the dive to teach environmental justice. There are a lot of resources out there. And again, I highly recommend coupling it with something that is going to also empower students so that they don't feel that they're burdened with this information, but they feel that they are empowered with the information so that they're able to create change in their communities and other communities. And that is why you should teach environmental justice.